Buenos dias. There we go. I heard an accent somewhere around there. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored to be here. So thank you guys for waking up this early. This, for me, is like the equivalent of most of your 4 a.m. because of the way I work and my schedule. So if I yawn, it's not because I'm bored at myself. It's just my schedule is a little different. But super excited to be talking about pioneering. But I've spent a lot of my time doing startups. Have successfully sold one, and on the second one, we're on the verge of something crazy. I don't know. As our investor said, it's either going to be feast or famine. But today's topic is pioneering, and that's something very close to my heart, just because it's something that my family has been part of, as well as myself. Now, when we think about pioneering, obviously, this is actually my cousin. I'm just kidding. He's not my cousin. But when we think about pioneering, and we were looking at the images earlier today when we were sitting here, it essentially means when someone starts something new, embarks through waters uncharted, and typically it involves doing something that before it was completed seemed impossible. And so what I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about my story, where I am today, and about 2 or 3 different lessons that I learned along the way that have really transformed how it is that we do business as a whole. So I was born in this country called Guatemala. It's about a third the size of Nebraska, but has about 4 times more individuals living there. That's actually a typical dress that people wear down there. So depending on the tribe, they actually have different patterns and colors. It's actually pretty cool. And there are a lot of companies that now sell wardrobe like that. But I was born there in 1988 to a family of obviously 2 parents and 2 other brothers. So I'm the ugly middle child. And so the interesting part about this is that by the time I was born, my father had not entered ministry as a whole. So he worked professionally, worked for the government, led a successful job essentially managing half of the country's customs. So I was born to a privileged family. Income disparity in Guatemala is high. You're either very wealthy or extremely poor. And so I was fortunate to be born to the first one until I was about 1 year old. So all of a sudden, after being very wealthy, my father answered a call to ministry. It had always been in his heart, and so he abandoned absolutely everything. But before doing that, one of the last things he did was have a couple of different companies that he would have. And this is the first story. Interestingly enough, my dad's a weird man. And the only reason they say that is because he has an amazing heart, but he's a terrible business guy. An example is he started a chain of bakeries in Guatemala that made bread. And funny enough is that he became very well known around the city because the bread was really good. And it was awesome. A side story, I actually had a 3rd-degree burn at one of the bakeries. And so I would say it's a miracle that I have 0 scars now. That's another story in its own. But one day at the bakery, the reason this bakery did not succeed in the long term was because my father felt so bad for the individuals who had no food that he would give about half of the bread away. And so that was a terrible business decision, as you could imagine, because it was not sustainable long term. But I ended up getting a little bit of that, which is trying to be your brother's keeper as a whole. And that theme will resonate over the next couple of minutes. My first big lesson was in school. I went to Central High School, go Eagles, best high school in the world. And I was not the best student ever. Did not have the highest grades. Typically, I was really good at tests, so I would always do great in tests. But I was always the one talking after class, or when the teacher said, "Hey, everybody shut up," I was the one whose voice would still sound. And so I was not the most studious individual. But I was very involved in school, and I have no idea how it happened. My junior year, actually this was my senior year, I was sitting in class, and all of a sudden I get a call. There's someone that goes to pick me up, I think it was during homeroom or something, and says, "Hey, you need to come to the office." And I was like, "Oh, I haven't done anything wrong." But I ended up getting up, walked to the class, and one of the interesting things it was the weirdest scenario ever, because I walk into the room with the principal and a couple of different counselors, and the top 4 students of the class are there, and then there's me, which is like, I think I was in the top 10 or something, but I was not the top 1% of the class. And so I was there with the class president and the smartest kids, and they said, hey, you guys have all been nominated for a scholarship. It's not a public scholarship, but it's 10 grand, which for a high school student was a lot of money. And you have to write about something. And that something is, I am my brother's keeper. And I was like, that title sounds familiar. And it actually comes from, in Genesis, and this is not a religious talk by any means, with Cain and Abel. And after Cain killed his brother and he was questioned where his brother was, he said, I'm not my brother's keeper. And so I remembered that, and I was like, this is very interesting. So the scholarship was from an anonymous donor. We would never know who he is, and I competed for the scholarship with the top 5 students. By some miracle, after some time, I remember standing in line to get my cap and gown, and the counselor walks in, and I wrote the essay the night before it was due because that's me, right? And so I didn't think I had a shot. I honestly didn't, because I'm like, how am I going to compete against these guys, you know, and these girls that are incredibly smart and very well known. All of a sudden, she comes up to me, standing in class in the middle of the hallway, standing in the middle of the hallway, and she's tiny. She's like this high, and I'm a little tall. So she just looks at me and she starts crying, and she says, "You won the scholarship," and I couldn't believe it. So I was in shock, and so I went to the bathroom and I sat in the toilet. I wasn't doing anything. I sat in the toilet, and I felt some tears coming down my face because I was like, how? I didn't understand how I won it. So obviously part of me wanted to thank the donors. I ended up talking to the counselor and to the principal. I was like, hey, can you tell me who these donors are so I can send a thank you letter? And they're like, I'm sorry, we cannot tell you. They wanted to remain anonymous. And that was for me, that was weird, because we live in a society where everyone wants to know that you're doing good deeds, and you have to market it, and of course it looks good on paper, but it's transitioned to where people do it because of the exposure versus because of something that they really feel on the inside. A couple of years later, I'm in college, and I get another scholarship I was a part of a full ride, and I get another scholarship to go study abroad, which I was like, yes, this is awesome, I'm gonna do it. And before I did that thing, and this is like 3 or 4 years later, I still wanted to say thanks. It's like, I just wanted to say thank you, and that's it. Because that scholarship transformed my life. I ended up going to Chicago to get my Spanish visa because I was going to study in Madrid, when I was like, you know what? I'm going to blackmail the counselor. And so we ended up running into a situation where I was like, hey, now you need to help me. So can you tell me who this person is, who the donors are? And she says, I'll tell you only because of one reason, and that is the donor passed away. And I was like, oh man, so I can't tell him thank you anymore. And she was like, you know what, he's an old individual, or was an old individual, came to Central High, and he's done this for a couple of students over the years. He's a physician in Chicago. And so I was like, can you give me his name? So gave me his name, and being the social media creeper, I tracked down his family online and found that he had donated a couple of things in Chicago, and I was like, this is pretty interesting. So before I head to Chicago to get my visa, I was like, I want to be able to find his family and at least say thank you to his family. So I call like 6 hospitals. This is weird. I found out that his son was a doctor, a physician. So I call like all of the hospitals in Chicago, and this is weird, random floors. I'm like, hey, is this doctor here? Is this doctor here? And a lot of them would be like, no, we have no idea who he is. So I finally get one that says, yes, he's actually at this other hospital today. Would you like his number? And I'm like, yes, please. Transfers me, give him a call, and he answers. And I'm like, hey, is this so-and-so? And he's like, yes, this is he. I'm like, hey, I have a question. Do you have a minute? And he was like, actually, I'm very busy right now. He's a neurosurgeon. And I was like, well, it's actually about your father. And he says, is this a joke? My father passed away. And I was like, no. Look, what he did is he gave me a scholarship many years ago, and I just wanted to say thanks. And he goes like, my dad what? He gave scholarships away? So his son didn't know his dad was a huge donor, and scholarships was just one of the few things he did. And I was like, well, I just wanted to say thanks, and I'm going to Chicago, and if you guys would be willing, I would love to buy you a cup of coffee. I ended up going to Chicago, and he says, well, why don't you go meet my mother? And he says, she won't know who you are. And I was like, well, that's kind of odd, of course, but I ended up going to Chicago, and very nice area, awesome condo, actually, by the way. I ended up getting there, and by this point, it was him, his sister, her husband, and the mother. And so they take me to where the lady is, the donor, and she's in her bedridden because she has dementia. And so she's at a very late stage, and she could not, like, she didn't even know who her kids were. So I walk in there, and I go up to her, and I say, hey, I know you have absolutely no idea who I am, but I just wanted to say thanks. And that was sort of this weird closure for me. And I wanted to say thanks, and she's, saying other things, and her daughter starts crying, and she goes, I never knew my parents did this. I never even knew they gave money away like that. And so turns out that not only had they covered my scholarship, but one of my really good friends that I was competing against, they gave her half of the capital as well. And so it was just, they were very generous in what they were doing. And that's where I learned my first lesson, which was being selfless and doing things not because you're receiving credit for it. And I think that's something that's very counterintuitive, because we attach our self-worth to so many different things, whether it's monetary or getting credit for work that we do, and when we do not, we feel as if we are being underappreciated. And that was very interesting. So that really touched my life, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to work hard and try to do something similar to what my father did, which was try to help others. Obviously, that doesn't mean we don't like to make money. I want a few Ferraris at some point as well, but it is also being a brother's keeper, right? It's being able to help someone that, maybe you don't have to give your stuff away, but rent it to them or teach them how to do certain things. I mean, there are a million different ways, and there's so many different needs around the world that need someone to rise up to the occasion and do something about it. And that was the first lesson. It really resonated with me, and I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter if we don't take credit. We're not going to be marketing ourselves. So most of you have probably never heard about Crumb because we don't market ourselves. We're super old school. It's like, I think word of mouth is the best. And in healthcare, that turned out to be one of the best approaches, because healthcare is tough. Healthcare is incredibly difficult, and I'll talk about that in a bit. After I came back from Spain, I had already left my first startup. I sat on the board, but I was no longer active as a regular employee. And I decided I was working in corporate. I got bored. That's the short answer. I got pretty bored, and knew I wanted to work on something more valuable. Not to say that corporate jobs are not valuable, but I really wanted to work on something that had the likelihood of being able to save someone's life. So we started Crumb, and what Crumb does is pretty simple. We build decision support systems for healthcare, and by doing this, our end goal is to automate about 80% of what nurses and doctors do in a hospital setting. If you're not familiar with how healthcare is today's day and age, the third leading cause of death in the United States is medical errors. And most people do not know that. That kills more people than we usually think. And it's not because we have bad doctors or bad nurses. We just have systems that are still being used that have code or language bases from a programming perspective from the 1970s and the 80s. And so this has become a huge issue nowadays. On top of that, these systems that exist today are incredibly expensive. The percentage of our GDP that goes into healthcare is one of the highest in the world, yet we don't have the best quality. When I was in Spain, I wanted to do something, and I read something by Dan Ariely. I have a degree in behavioral economics, and Dan Ariely said something that I really liked, and he said, if you want to be successful in life, pursue what everyone's running away from, because it's the unpopular thing. It's very common for, when big data is the popular thing, everyone's doing big data. This is across everything. You look at teenagers today and how they do their makeup, for example. Their eyebrows are all similar, right? Different styles. And this goes across society as a whole. We all follow patterns because that's how we are as humans. We communicate and we associate ourselves with other individuals and different subcultures. Technology is the exact same way. But I really took that to heart, and I was like, you know what? We need to pursue something that no one else is pursuing. And so we were dumb enough and naive enough to start something in healthcare because it was difficult. Now, I was born wealthy, but after we went to Belize, that was pretty much gone because we used our own capital to sustain ourselves for 4 years in Belize. while we were doing a lot of community service. While Hurricane Mitch hit Belize, my father was one of the main points of contacts for the Red Cross and a bunch of other NGOs that went and actually provided relief to the country. I had left that lifestyle, so I didn't have the access to or the network to a lot of capital, which is what healthcare startups need. So we started with my brother, and I was like, dude, let's start something and let's build something that is practically impossible. So our end goal as a company is to be able to take technology, and yes, in the US, there's tons of awesome technology and medical record systems, but we wanted to go where people don't usually go. And given our relationship to Latin America, we wanted to take healthcare there and technologies. Now, you'd be surprised, but in Guatemala, for example, the second largest network of healthcare and hospitals covers about 7 million people across multiple clinics that are affiliated with them. From a technological perspective, and this was interesting to me, and I was kind of surprised, they run their medical record system on Excel. Like, they use Excel to manage their patients' care. And so I was like, what in the world is going on here? And in the US, right, some of you that had children, you take your kids and their medical record is there. Sometimes it doesn't work, but at least there's a system designed for it. Around the world, they don't have that luxury because these countries do not have $200 million to spend on the system every 2 years, like we do in the United States. And so we wanted to build something crazy, which was let's build the infrastructure for healthcare for the rest of the world. Sort of do what Alibaba did for e-commerce outside of the US and outside of the developed countries, because it's a huge opportunity. Yes, it is very likely that we will most likely fail. It's about a 99% chance, but that 1% chance is still there, so we'll take it. And I think that's something else that pioneers do, and I don't want to title myself a pioneer because it's a very objective and relative term, but one of the interesting things is that's something that I've seen in a lot of people who I admire who are pioneers, which is when something seems impossible, against all odds, they just jump straight into it. And we did, and oh my God, we've learned so much along the way. Being a brown kid, I've learned a lot as well in the business sector, because in healthcare, a lot of the decisions in the United States for which technology is used in a lot of hospitals is not based on how good the technology is. It's based on who you last played golf with 2 weeks ago. And so I love the aspect that it's based on relationships, but sometimes that hinders innovation, and which is why we're so far behind as a country in terms of technology. And so I did not have the network. I mean, my dad's a pastor, so usually the people that go to our church do not fit that demographic. And so we're like, well, let's just start it with my brother. We're 2 kids, we have 0 money, but let's go for it. Ended up getting some seed capital, met this angel investor who really understood what we were doing, and it was, we had very similar endeavors, and he ended up giving us some capital as well. So we decided to go with it, as well as Invest Nebraska. We're gonna raise a lot of money, and we needed $50,000 to close our round. 50 grand. Now, for some of us, that's a lot. For most investors, that's pocket change. So 50 grand is all we needed. We had some big names that were investing, and we called maybe 130 investors, and no one wanted to invest. And we're like, why would you not invest? Like, if I came up to you guys and said, hey, Google's investing $1 million, who here wants to give 10 grand? Most of you would say yes. Now, Google was not the big name investor. I wish it would have been. But it was another big organization, and it was the weirdest thing ever. No one wanted to invest. And we were like, well, why not? And we were upfront. It just, we're in this for the long term. And that's another thing about perseverance and persistence is success never comes to those who are smart or intelligent or even applied. Success always comes to those who are stubborn enough to withstand the ups and downs. Because when you're an entrepreneur, out of every 100 days, 98 of them will be bad, to not say any other words. They'll be terrible. Like, you have a feature and then some big competitor announces that they're introducing this new feature, and you're like, holy crap, what are we gonna do now? So what do you do then? And you're a small company with 0 name. I mean, there's 0 track record. What do you do? And the answer is you just keep going forward. But most of our initial reaction is to stand back. And so when we were doing that capital fundraise, no one wanted to invest, and we couldn't understand why. And then we realized it's because we had told them that they would not receive the return for at least 5 years or 10 years. We're in it for the long term. And we were upfront with it because that's how long I think it's going to take us to be successful. So everyone wanted a quick turnaround. Turns out we end up running this thing called capital exhaustion, which essentially means that you took too long to raise, so now no one wants to come in because that's a bad sign. And that was really painful for us. It was very difficult because it really hits your ego. I mean, they say, don't take sales personal. I think that's BS, right? I think you should, it's not that you should put your faith and hope into it, but of course it sucks when you really believe in something and absolutely no one is following behind it. But we had seen the effect that it had in hospitals. Like we ran some pilots with our system, and the change, and this is something that we set out to do, is we set to build technology that changes the atmosphere in hospitals. And doing something like that was very difficult, but we had had a taste of it. We had taken our software to a children's hospital, and they were like, holy crap, this is freaking awesome. Like it literally changed the room and the atmosphere when we walked in there, from something super stressful and difficult and what everyone else didn't want to do or invest in, to when we showed the results, everyone was like, wow, this is really incredible. And so when we wanted to do that, ouch. Yeah, I'm gonna move here. When we wanted to do that, you know, we had believed in it, and we remembered the why behind it. And that's one of the things that I want to finish with. And this is, obviously I have a background with my father being a pastor and all of that, so by no means am I preaching to anyone here. I'm not someone that would ever impose my religious beliefs, but I'll share something very personal with you guys. We were going through a very difficult time financially with our family many years ago. And it was just leaving things because, like, if my dad would have lost his job, we would have understood, but when you do something on purpose and kind of like become poor on purpose, that's a completely different ballgame. Like it really changes things. And so one of the things is that, you know, we spent many days hungry in Belize, and one of the things that I remember there is we slept in cardboard beds for 2 days when we arrived. And that's from being like the richest kids in the block to doing that. It was a real change for us. And we were struggling financially once, and here's the analogy I want to make with this. Is I wake up one day, I think I drank too much water, so I needed to go to the bathroom like at 4 a.m. So I wake up, and I'm trying to open the door quietly so I don't wake anyone else up. And as soon as I'm on the way to the bathroom, I see that the light in the living room was on. And I could hear someone like whispering, so I was like, this is kind of odd. So, you know, creeping down there, and I try to see what's happening. And all of a sudden I see my father praying. And I was like, this is interesting. And I could hear what he was praying about, and he was you know, asking God for strength in this, or, you know, in his own way. And I just went back to the bathroom. I didn't want to pee anymore, or went back to bedroom. And I sat down, and I was like, and I didn't understand this until like 5 days ago. When things get difficult, the only thing that will keep you continuing and going is going back to your why. In his case, he had answered our calling and he associated that with God, right? But all of us here get up and do things. We marry people for a reason. We have a career for a reason. We studied something for a reason. There are a million things that we do every single day. And somewhere along the road, we made the decision to take that path, that road. And that is the why behind the reason why we do something. And the thing I wanted to leave you with is, when things get difficult as a pioneer, the worst thing you can do is forget your why. It's why you started in the first place. An easy example is divorce rates, right? I just married this girl about a month ago. So she's the babe. And you know, I was told, given a piece of advice by someone that very close to me, and he says, you know what, never forget why you married her. Is never forget that, because the moment you forget that and let your issues and the way you grow and the way you continue your life and the path that you decide to take, never forget why, because the second you do that will be the second problems will begin to be bigger than the main reason. And I believe that's the exact same thing in business and in our personal lives. Right? It's the second you forget why you started doing something is the second you're probably going to fail. And that's the one thing that I was sitting in the car and I was like, holy crap, I remember that single day, and I wasn't even thinking about talking today or sharing it here. But an example is we're trying to achieve something that's practically impossible, and I have no idea how. We ended up talking to people at the World Health Organization and Pan American Health Organization are now trying to take our technology to countries that cannot afford it, provide it for free, while we are able to harness that information, the data, and be able to save lives. So ultimately, we want, when anyone interacts with health data anywhere around the world outside of the developed countries, we want them to use their system, right? And I'm a terrible business guy, and I'll admit to that, just like my father, because money for us is the afterthought. Right? The main focus is creating value for someone. And I think that's the true essence of a pioneer, is your focus should always be in creating value for someone else. The reason why we have most startups that fail is because people enter entrepreneurship or startups because they can, because they got fired, because they got laid off, because they want to make $1 billion or $300 million, whatever the case may be. But there's usually an incentive that is very temporary, and in the long term, when it hits the fan, that why is not going to be strong enough to keep them there. And so now that, obviously we're going big on this, like I said, we're not doing it as a charity, we're a for-profit corporation. Like I said, I want to have a few Ferraris every once in a while. But the main goal is to create value for society. And when you do something very well, someone once said, passion is that thing that you would do for free, but you do it so damn well that people are willing to pay you for it. And I think it's very true. And I'll finish with this last story because I don't know if I'm over time or not. But the interesting part about this is there's this investor that I was helping, and it has to do with the Bay. There's an investor that, our investor has a partner, and we were working on a project that I was doing for free because I like doing it, right? So it has to do with this website stuff and servers. And so they needed help, and I was helping them out. And for 2 years, I didn't charge them at all because it was easy and I knew how to do it. So servant's heart is another thing, which I won't touch base because we don't have time, but he ends up calling me and he says, hey man, I know you've helped us out a lot. I'm meeting now Vice President Joe Biden. He's coming over here and our system's not working. Can you help us with it? Our engineers can't figure it out. And I was like, oh crap, that's probably gonna be a hard issue. He sends me the information, log into the system, and it takes me like 5 minutes to do it. Not because it was hard, I just knew a trick around it because I've done it before. I send it back and he goes like, holy crap, this is awesome, thank you so much, man. Calls me back like 3 days later, bro, like we have this other issue for South by Southwest, he's one of the organizers. Can you help us? I was like, sure, of course. Takes me like 3 minutes again. Help him, he's like, oh man, thank you so much. And again, it's not because I'm smart, I want to clarify that. I've just done this a lot of times, so it became pretty easy. And he's like, all right, cool, man. So he comes back like a month later and he goes like, dude, there's this project with a pretty cool organization and you've helped us out a lot, so I thought I'd help you out as well. Turns out this organization is NASA. And I was like, ooh, so what are you saying, come again? And so we ended up getting this pretty cool project through that as well. And look, we didn't get it because we're the smartest pioneers at all. Like by far we are not, trust me. And I always say there are 3 types of companies in the world. There's the Apples, which have really good products and very hefty prices, but they're worth a premium because they've proven themselves. Then there's the Amazons of the world, which sell a lot at very low cost. We can't do that because we're a startup and I do need to eat every once in a while. And then there's the 3rd type of company, which is your only competitive advantage is neither pricing nor quality. It's customer service. And so I always say honesty is the best warranty every single day. And we've had physicians call us, directors of healthcare and informatics or whatever, at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. And they'll call me and say, yo, dude, there's a HIPAA violation on the system. We need to figure this out, and that's a big deal because we're going live. And we're like, yo, I'm pretty sure that's not our fault. And sometimes it's not. Like most of the time it's their engineers that did something, and then it puts us in a bad position. So we put our engineers, and I'll call 2 of our engineers and be like, yo, there's this issue going on, and at 5:30 a.m. we're video chatting and using Slack, on the computers trying to figure this out. And we'll get it done. And that's our promise, is we work hard. And that's what I wanted to leave you guys with. Just never forget your why. Most of the time, it's really good to be selfless, because that means that we get our ego out of the way. And even though it may take a long time, you'll meet someone who, because you've helped them or provided something to them or created value for them, will want to help you again. And I think that's better than us going to NASA knocking on the door as nobodies, because no one would know us. But through this, someone was able to help us, and that happened with the World Health Organization and a bunch of other hospitals that we worked with. That's just a little bit of a story. I'm now pioneering this relationship, so I'm sure I have a lot to learn. But I just wanted to say thank you for coming here and listening, and hopefully I didn't go over time. I'm sorry.